Okay, so all you guys want to listen to my nasally New York accent for another 2 hours, huh? Isn't it's reaching the edges of human endurance, I think, so I thank all you. Very polite. I heard people in the Midwest were very polite, and you haven't disappointed me. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about food grade grains crash course. And basically, I've got this flour mill, and we contract with a lot of different farmers to grow grain for our mill. And it has to meet certain quality specs. So I'm just going to go through here and look at things that I see the guys that I work with either didn't know or they get wrong, and none of it's rocket science. You just have to know it, and you know, one of the biggest things about growing for the food grade market is you got to remember it's food, right? I mean, when you're used to growing commodity crops that's going to an ethanol plant or whatever, you know, there's a certain level of sanitary cleanliness that's going to go into this. And you got to pay attention to details throughout the process to come up with something that's going to be acceptable to a buyer, or maybe you're going to do some processing or whatever. And so what's happened here is there was going to be a fella from Purdue that was going to talk about grain storage. I think his daughter was sick, he couldn't make it. So luckily for me, my good friend from Illinois, Wilkens, who has a Midwestern version of what we do in New York in terms of having his own flour mill and producing for the food grade market. He's got a lot of great experience, you know, so you don't have to just take it from Mr. Nasal Voice, whether this is the truth or not. He can tell you how this works out in the real Midwestern farm country. So, all right, let's dive into this topic. Let's see, this isn't working, so we're not diving too fast here. Ooh, there we go. All right, so I'm just going to start out with, what do we plant? You know, what sort of varieties work? We've spent a lot of time working on figuring out what varieties of different crops. You know, one of my main crops is wheat for bread flour. You know, what varieties, when we started this, everyone said, oh, you can't grow good wheat in New York, you know, it's too humid. You guys have the same sort of humidity and issues that we have. You know, so we've done a lot of bake testing. We did a big trial down in New York City at the French Culinary Institute, looking at, you know, which varieties have good baker acceptance, and then taking those back to the farm and seeing, okay, well, what are the agronomics on these wheats that do well with the bakers, and can we profitably and reliably produce these? So, you know, I'm going to have, after I talk, I'm going to have Harold come up and talk about maybe some varieties that weren't on this list, or what his experiences were with these, so you can see, you know, how do these grow in the real farm country. So this is sort of our workhorse variety. It's called Warthog. It's a hard red winter wheat. People love it so much, there's a brewery in Massachusetts, Wormtown Brewery, that actually named a beer after it. It does very well as a malted wheat, and these Hefeweizen beers are very popular. A lot of other beers use wheat, so we sell a lot of this to malt houses, and it's also can be used raw, and we'll talk more about uses later. Super reliable workhouse. Farmer Ground Flour is my mill. So if you see FGF, that's what it is. So it's got really good Fusarium, and I'm going to talk about Fusarium. That's the main disease that's a problem in food grade wheat. And sprout resistance. Sprout, you know, I don't want to bore anybody who knows all this stuff, but I'm going to go through it all. Sprouting is when the wheat is physically mature in the field and it gets wet. the wheat can actually try to germinate in the head, and I'm not talking germinate like there's roots coming out of it. It's a tiny enzymatic change. You know, when that seed tries to grow, it releases an enzyme called alpha amylase. The alpha amylase starts converting the starches inside the seed into sugars, and that has to do with a thing called falling number, which I'll talk to, and that can destroy its baking qualities. So if you're in a wet area, you want something that's got good resistance to pre-harvest sprouting, and this is a great crop that way. You can see it's makes beautiful straw if you like to sell straw on your farm. It's got really good protein quality, but only average protein quantity, meaning the total protein number. So it might be 10% protein. What do you usually get, Harold? 10, a little over 10 in terms of percent protein. But what we found is that total protein number does not necessarily equate to baking quality. You go over to France where everybody will admit the French make some of the best breads in the world, and look at the wheat that those French are using, super low protein numbers. Now all these places that you might sell to on a commodity market are gonna just look at that total protein number when you send it in for a test. But that protein number is just measuring how much nitrogen there is in the seed, right? Protein's made out of nitrogen. So quality and protein number are different. So what we found with this is it's got great quality protein. This was a winner when we did the New York City baking trials, and I took that home and planted it, and it grows excellent in New York. Harold, your opinion would be? Thumbs up from Harold, so it gets the Midwestern seal of approval. And for us, it's got great name recognition. People call up and they want Warthog wheat. So Harold's going to say, where's our, there it is. Give him a few words on Warthog.
Okay, so first of all, I think maybe I better introduce myself a little bit. My name's Harold Wilkens. The name of our farm is Janie's Farm Organic. The name is Janie's Farm Organics. We're located at Danforth, Illinois, which for some reason everybody in Indiana knows where Kentland is. And so I'm 40 miles almost west of Kentland, almost straight west. Anyway, so I got introduced to Thor through a mutual friend of ours. And anyway, Thor has been my mentor on being the farmer for a flour mill. In fact, I got my first Warthog wheat through Thor, and it's turned out to be a really, really good wheat for us. And one of the things I wanted to throw in here is that if you have a baker who really knows how to bake like sourdough bread or other breads that knows it as a craft, they'll take this stuff and make a beautiful loaf of bread. But if you're going to go to ADM or Heartland Mills or wherever, where it's all about the numbers, they're not going to like this wheat. But somebody who knows how to bake bread and do a really, really good job at it, they're ones that are going to take this wheat and make it turn out real well.
That's very true. Yeah, and this fall, Wegmans, which is a huge food market chain in New York, I don't know how far west they go, but they had a baking, they're starting to bake their own organic local bread. They were using this other variety that had been recommended by this mill, and then we just sent the farm that grows for them 33 tons of Warthog seed this fall, because they finally figured out that this is the variety that makes really superior tasting bread. So I think Harold makes a good point there. You gotta, the place you might grow for might have a different variety, but you know, I can attest to the quality here. In terms of spring wheat, Glen, we've tried a lot of different spring wheats. There's a lot of good spring wheat out there, but for us, Glen has done the best job. And the thing I like about Glen is it's the first wheat I've had that's broken the 15% protein mark. And how we were able to do that is by plowing down red clover. And I had been nervous about how much nitrogen can I feed spring wheat without it going flat. Lodging is always an issue with small grains. And Glen is the only variety that can take that kind of huge protein input and not go flat on us. And it also, as you saw from the, can take a licking and keep on ticking, and it has pretty consistent yields. I know Harold also plants Glen. Do you have any other spring wheats that you're working with that you like?
We're testing.
He's testing some other ones. We're going to work on a few other varieties, but for us, this has been the gold standard spring wheat. Competes well with weeds, excellent disease resistance and sprout resistance. Those two things are really important to us, but it's a total bitch to thresh. It does not like coming out of the head at all, and every time I sell this, I almost always, I think I had some friends of Harold's called me up and like, how do I set the combine for this stuff? I can't get it, you know. It's just really difficult to thresh, and I would say if there's one thing I don't like about it, it's not your best feel-good moment sometimes when you start out with this. So if you decide to do this and want to call up and scream at me, I'll tell you how I adjust my combine to make it work. But this has been a really wonderful wheat for us. So we also grow soft white wheat. Soft white wheat is used for pastry flour. Soft white wheat, it does low protein wheat, does good in humid environments. In New York State is a soft white wheat state, you know, because of our environment. A lot of this goes into pastries. Pillsbury uses this stuff, you know, on the conventional side. But in order to make good pastry flour, you need a soft wheat. You don't want your, you know, nice croissant to come out like a loaf of bread. It wants to be nice and crumbly, and thus, you know, this nice white color. Low protein allows it to have those qualities. I found this wheat growing on a neighbor of mine's farm, and he had been, that's a great place sometimes to find adapted varieties. You can't find Harrus wheat anywhere. It doesn't exist. But he had been growing this because it's an old tall straw wheat. You know, they kept shrinking wheat as they've increased yields to keep it from lodging. Well, a lot of these tall straw varieties are the ones we want to use in organic because they shade the weeds better. This guy sold to the racetracks down in New York City straw, so he wanted the straw yields. And I got some of this wheat from him and sent it to my bakers, and they went bananas over it. And then I found out it did excellent in organic. So this is what we're using now. If anyone's interested in soft white wheat, wants some Harrus seed, I can provide it out. Do you have Harrus wheat? What do you plant, Harold?
We're using
Frederick?
Yeah, we're
working.
Frederick's white wheat.
Yeah, so he uses Frederick, which is another popular variety. You know, it's got great agronomics, and soft white wheat sprouts the easiest of all the wheats. So I'm talking 20% moisture, we're out there combining this and drying it, right? So once it sprouts, it ends up as distilling wheat. But this is what I sell to distilleries as what they use to make their base alcohol. What most of them want is either soft white or soft red. I've got one distillery that uses hard red wheat. He seems to think that has the best qualities for distilling. You know, I'll just say about growing wheat and food grade wheat or rye, it's really nice, if you're really going to get into this, to have those distilleries as part of your marketing plan, because every year is going to be different, as we all know, and there's going to be years where this doesn't make baking quality. Say you get a lot of rain at harvest and it sprouts. Well, if you think about what a distiller does, they sprout the wheat. They want to convert the starches in that kernel to sugars so that that's what makes the alcohol, right? So if it's sprouted, for them that's actually an advantage because they put enzymes in there to do the conversion. So those enzymes have already been released in the seed, and it's already started its way towards the type of grain that they need to mash to make alcohol. So, you know, what I learned early on is I need those distillers to utilize some of that grain that isn't of baking quality. So if you want to get into this, that could also go into the animal feed industry. They had some slides yesterday about food grade wheat and feed grade wheat, and I think there was probably a $4 discount between the two per bushel, which is quite a bit, but there is a market for it. The great thing about distilleries is I can usually get the same or sometimes a little bit better price to them because they're willing to pay it for wheat that's actually not baking quality. So this is a really good one to grow, and as I said, it does well under organic management. So Harrus, that isn't something you're going to be able to find. Harold's variety, Frederick, would be definitely a variety you could probably get anywhere, and Harold would certainly have that if you were interested. So rye, so when we got into this flour milling thing, most of the rye in New York was this cover crop rye, a rustic rye. That's what the Myers grow. I was talking to them about this. A rustic rye, it's great for cover crop seed, but it's got these tiny little seeds. So the ratio of starch to bran is really low, right? So in milling or in distilling or in malting, they don't care about that, the bran part of it. That's almost a side product. What they want is that starch. And so we went looking for a variety of rye that had big, plump kernels with good flavor. Tried a lot of different ryes out. This is a variety we got out of Canada that's from Poland. And it's specifically a milling type rye. And as it turns out, has really good yields, really good lodging resistance. It's sort of a medium tall rye. And it's got awesome baking qualities, really, really beautiful looking berries. So when somebody opens a bag of this, it's a distillery or a malt house, they look in there, it's got these nice green kernels. I mean, eye appeal means a lot, you know. It's a beautiful rye, and I think, are you growing Danko Rye, Harold?
We put some in this fall.
Oh, okay, all right,
so
he's gonna be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually, this past year, used a rye called Barsetto. It's a hybrid rye put out by KWS. The reason we used that was we were told that that was a good rye variety to use also like in the distilling and in the baking, and we've had good reviews with it. We run it through our mill. Our bakers love it. But one of the things that I've learned about being an organic farmer is synchronizing your seed to your farm, which means I want to plant my rye over again. I plant my wheat over again. And it seems like when we get it used to our rotation in it, and get it used to growing on our farm, it has certain characteristics that will be the same year in and year out. And bakers are like Lutherans. They want their rye and their wheat the same every year. So, you know, they get used to something. You change varieties, you change, or, you know, even with the agronomics changes, and they notice and they'll adapt, but they like keeping the same thing that they've had in and out. We're going away from Barsetto. one of the things that was, and I don't want to dominate, but one of the things that was,
go ahead.
one of the things that was mentioned earlier about some things is if you're going to raise rye for food grade, you need to put out, and Thor, I'm going to throw in the Midwestern thing.
Yeah,
here.
do it. That's what we want.
So in your rotation, you're probably, if you're putting out like a small grain, you're going to be following a soybean. If you're following a soybean, you want to make sure that you plant an earlier variety, because raising food grade grains means get your butt in the seat, get your wheat, get your rye in the first week of October. Now I'm going by where I'm at in East Central Illinois, but I think that pretty well comes all the way down here to Indy, and you guys know about the fly-free date and that type on further and over into Ohio, but you need to be as close to that fly-free date as possible, because you need the growth in the fall to have the vigor to move on into next year. We were told that we were going to raise this 75 bushel hybrid rye. It was going to be great for milling and brewing, and we were going to be really excited. So when we got out there to combine last year, it was 40. And I'm going, I don't see anything here I'm proud of. So I started checking around a little bit, and Thor mentioned in his previous talk about timeliness. And that makes a difference in food grade. So I know everybody wants to plant the longest season bean so you can make 2 more bushel the acre than you would with an earlier bean. But if you're going to be in this business, you need to look at everything you do as a cycle. What Thor showed you and what he's doing in New York is a full cycle. When you become an organic farmer, you are no longer a monoculture farmer. So you can't be thinking, I'm going to do 10 bushel better if I do this, but it's going to affect next year. So you got to look at the whole cycle. So if you're planting a small grain, make sure you do it on an early variety of soybeans, earlier variety, and get your wheat and rye in as soon as you possibly can after the fly-free date.
Sage advice, Harold. Thank you. That's awesome. All right, so I think we've beaten this rye horse to death. Let's move on. So this is the variety of buckwheat I plant. It's called Culver VNS, and it's been grown in my county since 1847. And it's really adapted to where I live. I don't know. Harold, do you plant buckwheat?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Kodo he plants. That's the one I was talking about earlier. That's a Japanese variety. And Kodo has excellent milling qualities. That's probably, if you grow on contract, they might want Kodo. We find this to have great milling qualities, and I did a trial on my farm of 5 different buckwheat varieties, including Kodo. And now this is my farm. This was the best yield and best lodging resistance of all those varieties. We had Mancan in there and Manitoba. I can't remember what the other one was. So we've stuck with it. It's a really, really, really nice buckwheat variety. So those are sort of the varieties generally of the different food grade. You know, I mean, buckwheat isn't, I guess, a small grain, but we're putting it in there. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about harvesting. This is a lot of basics probably for guys that are super experienced. Maybe this is something you don't need to hear again, but I always find sometimes, even yesterday, I thought I knew a lot about certification because I've done it so many times, and I always pick up a few tidbits of things I should think about. So my apologies to any experienced small grain people out there. I'm just going to go through some of the stuff that the guys that I work with blow all the time. So you know, the thing, food grade, as I said before, even before you start harvesting this stuff, you know, start thinking about food grade. This is going to be food, and doing a real quality job, as Harold just said. You know, I mean, even thinking about it in terms of planting date, all those things are going to add up along the way to either a success or a failure for this. So, you know, one of the big problems that you're going to have in terms of rejection of this crop is going to be Fusarium. Now, is that a big problem out in the Midwest? It is. All right, so Harold has confirmed with me that this isn't just an issue that I'm dealing with. And, you know, you need to monitor that. There's maps that are put out for Fusarium alerts, and you can look those up. We get one through Penn State. Is there one for Illinois for Fusarium? There's probably something you can look, a website, I should have had that up here, a website that you could look at in terms of when the conditions are right for the plant to get infected. And when it gets infected is at anthesis, which is flowering, all right? So for wheat, that's about a 10-day period usually. For rye, it goes on for almost 2 weeks, or almost 3 weeks actually. So rye has actually a longer time to become infected. So I always keep an eye out when my wheat is flowering and make some notes about the weather so I know if this is going to be something I need to really worry about, something I need to scout for. There isn't much you can do about it. I mean, it's weather related. The best thing you can do to prevent Fusarium is plant varieties that have some resistance. There's no wheats that are out there that are going to have strong resistance to Fusarium. Moderate resistance is as good as it's going to get. And you know, the conventional guys, they can go in and spray this stuff with a fungicide at flag leaf to try to prevent it. But all we've got is a good crop rotation here, guys. So that's where this food grade thing works back to a good crop rotation. You don't want to follow a grass with a grass. You don't want to follow, corn is a strong carrier of the Fusarium virus. It's in the stalks. I made the mistake early on of putting spring wheat in after corn. Well, the first year I did it, there was a drought and I didn't have a problem. And I thought, oh, this is no problem. The next year it was wet and all that inoculum was there and I lost the crop. So using a good crop rotation, coming in after a legume or some crop that does not harbor the Fusarium virus is your best bet. But that's only 20% effective in terms of lowering the incidence of it. So I go out if the weather has been such that I think there might be a Fusarium problem. I go out ahead of harvest and I just scout my fields. I just walk through them and I look for heads that are infected and try to get a bead on, you know, whether I think this is a big problem. Because if it is, you know, I've got farms over a 25-mile radius. It could be that one farm had wet weather and the thunderstorm missed over here, and I might want to separate those two crops into two separate bins, so you don't want to put good wheat in with bad wheat. The other thing is, if I know it's going into a farm that's got a lot of Fusarium on it, you want to adjust your combine accordingly. You can blow a lot of the infected kernels out with the combine. And I'll show you what, that's what it looks like for those of you that don't know. You'll see heads that are bleached out. That's called Fusarium head blight. And that virus causes a toxin, it's called DON, or vomitoxin. You know, for obvious reasons, if you have too much of this, it can make you physically ill. That's why it's regulated by the government, how much we can have in there. That's what it looks like. Here's a pretty bad infection, really wet year. You can see how bleached out the kernels look. The kernels don't mature properly. So see these guys here, that pink, that's the DON. That's how you know you've really got it on. If you see those type of kernels in there, and that's the legal limit for what you can have in terms of DON in your wheat. It's 1 part per million, right? So if you go over that, then it can be rejected. What we found at our mill, and I'm sure Harold knows this too, is with a gravity table, we can clean this down because these kernels, they're called Tombstone Kernels. I'll show you, see those? Those are Tombstone Kernels. They're these gray shriveled kernels. They're a lot, they may be the same exact size as a wheat, but they have a different mass than a healthy wheat kernel. So a gravity table is excellent at separating by mass. So we're able to clean that down to get it often underneath the limit. So being over 1 doesn't mean all of a sudden your wheat's a whole bunch of garbage, but it may be that either place you're going to sell it to, or if you're using this yourself, or you can take it to, do you have a gravity table, Harold? Yeah, take it to a guy like Harold who's set up for it, and they can clean it down so that you can still sell it to the bakery or the small mill or whoever your end buyer is. So there are ways out of this mess. So, but there's that expense, and you're also going to lose a bit during the process because you got to clean it really hard. So this is another disease to look out for. This is particularly a problem right now in Glen seed. All the organic Glen seed that I've seen, including my own, has all got loose smut in it. And that's what it does. It's not a quality problem, but it's a yield killer because that whole head just sort of disintegrates into this black powder. And what happens is when you go through, or the wind goes through, those spores go onto the head next to it, and that actually, it's a seed-borne disease. It goes into the seed, so the next time you plant, it just keeps accumulating, all right? And really the only way out of this, what we had to do to get this out of our Glen seed was I went to my conventional neighbor, and I had to have him plant my organic seed, and it gets treated with a substance called carboxyl. And carboxyl will actually kill that inside the seed when it germinates. And if you do that for 2 years in a row, you can really cut the incidence out of it. So I had to give it to him. He grew it for 2 years, and then I bought my organic seed back after 2 years as conventional, untreated seed that had gone through this process, and then I probably got 5 or 6 years until I have to do that again. And I bought Glen seed from a couple of different organic sources because I knew mine was infected, and all of theirs was infected too. And so I went to Gary Bergstrom, who's the plant pathologist at Cornell, and I said, well, I can't find any organic seed here that has not got this disease in it. What do we do? And that was the only solution to it. So that's what we had to do. I still see heads. I got that seed back after 2 years. We planted enough of it to put in to harvest for seed for myself and my growers. There's still some of it in there, but it's much reduced. So I'm just saying, if you see that in any of your seed, just watch out. And that's where scouting comes in. You get these problems that you don't realize that they're a problem. So, whoops. So those are kind of the two diseases, Fusarium being the big one. I'm going to talk about, what weeds are problems. Have you seen anything else, Harold, or have anything to add disease-wise that you've seen in your small grains out in the Midwest?
If we're having a really, really wet year, and I don't recommend this, but there is a product called Regalia that is a small seed fungicide that is organically certified, unless it's been pulled off the market, and I don't think it has. But one year when it was, we were expecting rains during the last 2 weeks of May, heavy rains, we sprayed regalia on one of our fields that was a susceptible variety to head scab. I can't tell you whether it worked or not because we didn't leave any checks, but I think it cost about $25 an acre to have it sprayed on. Like I said, it is organically certified. We used it on Mother's Day. It was been about 4 years ago. We sprayed it on Mother's Day because that's my timing in Iroquois County. But again, it's one of those things that might be hit or miss, and I don't recommend using it unless you know you've got a susceptible variety. The other thing I will say is last year I was up at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. They had an organic grain field day in June. It was very wet up there in Wisconsin. I don't know if you've experienced this, but they had 12 inches in a week of rain come through there, and then the next week they got one day and got 10 inches in one day. So they had 22 inches rain in 2 weeks. Anyway, everything in their plot, except for 2 varieties that had been bred with Warthog, were absolute junk. The 2 that had been bred with Warthog had a little bit of head scab in it, but they were able to salvage it and use it.
That's good to know. Weeds, always a problem in organic. These are all weeds. Maybe you know all these. A lot of the guys that were growing for me knew some of these, but not all of them, and or how to identify them and what the problems were. So I'm just going to run through. These are weeds that can all cause problems in cleaning afterwards to make a food grade, especially in flour. So, you know, just we go out and, believe it or not, we go out and hand rogue our fields. We don't get all of these weeds out, but often there's just a few of them in there. And, you know, A, I don't want them in the grain, but B, I don't want all that seed in my field, because then the problem, as we know, just compounds itself. So we take the time, often in the evening, me and my sweetie will go out, we'll make a couple of jugs of gin and tonics, and walk back and forth across the field in the beautiful evening, watch the birds pull up the weeds, and you do an hour and a half of it, 2 hours a night, and you just do it for a bunch of nights in a row and try to make it fun, you know, and it's just something that we do. And I don't get them all. Sometimes you're in a field and you get out there and it's so infested that maybe I won't harvest it. Maybe it becomes a cover crop, but at least I know I've walked through the field. So, you know, this is really important I think, to take the time and get out there. Now, maybe you don't have any of these weed problems, and then you're back on the porch with the pork chops and the beer, and you don't have to worry about any of this. But, you know, hairy vetch is a big problem. You know, all of these seeds or weeds, they're gonna set seed just about when you're ready to harvest the crop. I like to go out, you know, well before this time to pull this out. It's a viney crop. A lot of times it's used as a cover crop, and it's a great cover crop. If you want, it's just like I was talking about radish. If you want to do food grade, don't be planting hairy vetch. Hairy vetch has a ton of hard seed. You're going to be out there. You're going to need 4 or 5 gin and tonics to get you through, because it's going to be really bad. You know, I like to go out and pull these. Sometimes I'm on the combine going across the field and I'll see one. I'll stop the combine, run ahead, pull that sucker out, throw it in a bag inside the combine and keep going. I don't want this in there. The problem with it is, if you know what the seed looks like, a little black round circle. I don't know, I don't have a picture of it. It is exactly the same size and weight as a wheat seed. And it's got a bitter flavor, and it puts black flecks in the flour, and it looks like crap, and nobody's going to want to buy it. And to get it out, you need a machine called an indent separator. Do you have an indent? Harold doesn't need an indent. He doesn't have this on his farm.
No, but color sorters are...
Color sorter would do it too. Yeah, those are super expensive. An indent cleaner is a circular drum. The inside of it looks like the outside of a golf ball. So there's little pockets in there. And the drum is spinning around. The round vetch seeds go into those pockets and go farther up the drum as it circles before they fall out, and the oblong wheat seeds fall out lower on the drum's rotation, and in that sense you can get it out, but it's time consuming. What we found at the mill though was that when we get a really bad batch, although it takes forever, that vetch seed is worth about 5 times whatever it was that we cleaned it is worth. Vetch seed is worth a lot of money, and we sell it to the local vegetable farmers. So you can actually, I guess, make a case for, growing these things together and then separating them and having it as a value-added crop. Now, wild onion, this is particularly bad in areas that have wet, damp soils. This is a really, really bad weed to have, and I have a couple of sections on farms that I rent. I don't even go on them. They're just toxic. This stuff, if it gets in the wheat, it puts out these little bulbules that, again, the same size and weight as a wheat seed, and when those get crushed, they have a really, really strong odor. I mean, you don't want your wheat smelling like garlic. The other problem with these guys is these little bulbules last forever in the soil. You go through a field with that, and they get caught in a piece of tillage equipment or in your tire, and you drive to the next field and go, and they fall out. You can spread this weed all over your farm really fast. And there's no good organic control. There just isn't. There isn't even a really great way to spray this and kill it. It's because of it's got this waxy coating. It's really, really difficult weed. So keep your eye out for it if you've got it. We've gone out and hand dug up the bulbules, quarantined fields. It's all hell breaks loose if I find some of this stuff. So this is a really important weed to know about. There's us. We pull in the bulbules. You can see the little, they look like little garlic heads at the bottom, and then the bulbules come out at the top. And then when you combine, those little guys break up and they end up in the tank. You'll know it quick because you'll go and go, uh-oh, something's wrong here, and it smells like garlic. Now here's wild radish. This is a big problem, weed. I was talking before about tillage radish and how you don't want to use this. Well, this is the wild equivalent of tillage radish. This is a huge problem in Northern Europe in their small grains. Again, it's got this radishy flavor. Again, it's the same size as a wheat seed. The only thing that we've got, with this cleaning equipment is it's a different density than a wheat seed. So we are able to get this out. Again, it's got to go over to gravity table. Gravity table, you get losses. Gravity table takes time. We go out and try to hand weed this. I've got some fields that are so infested with it, they're in a whole nother rotation that doesn't include food grade grain in it. Maybe I would grow triticale for feed instead of warthog wheat in a field like that. But it's important to go out there, scout, know what your weeds are and which ones are problems for food grade, because if you're growing for someone else, they might reject your load here. And if it gets high enough, they won't even take it for chicken feed, because the chickens won't eat it. So here's just a little, that was one of our late night trips through the field. You can see the difference between wild radish and wild mustard. They look very similar, but the flowers are a different color. This is more of a bright yellow flower. The wild radish is a pale flower. You got to know the difference because you don't want to go in there and pull out mustard. Mustard is no sweat. Mustard is a tiny little seed. We can clean that out, piece of cake. I never worry about that, and it doesn't clog the combine up. It doesn't cause any issues at all. That's not a problem weed. That radish, you can see these guys here, these little, it's called a segmented pod seed head. Those are the guys that are going to break up into those little radish seeds that are going to cause you a lot of problems. Corn cockle, does everybody know corn cockle? This is a big problem weed. This is actually toxic. So if you see this growing, there's a couple fields I found 1 or 2 plants in. I don't really have this on my farm. And the thing of it is, you know, these weeds come in, they can come in on poorly cleaned seed. I've found even, you know, buckwheat seed. I've found giant ragweed seed in there that's been cleaned by a seed company. So the other place these things come in is you're using poultry manure, importing poultry manure. You know, a lot of times they're using grain that's of less quality. It could have different weed seeds in it. So whenever you're importing manure, you know, this weed could come in and you could say, well, where did I get that? You know, so some of these weeds, I think, you know, as organic farmers that are bringing manure in, you don't know what that manure is made out of, where that grain came from, and that's where a lot of weeds come from. So, you know, I don't have corn cockle now, but it could be my next load of chicken manure could be, you know, have corn cockle seed, and I could have it all over the farm. So you need to know what it looks like. And there's the seed. You can see the seed head. Well, again, the exact same size. It's just same size as a wheat seed. And again, off flavors, and, you know, we never have enough corn. You'd have to have pretty bad corn cockle to kill somebody, I bet. But they are poisonous. So that's, you know, easy to identify. Just something to wrap your head around. And, you know, ragweed, 5 minutes and I gotta move on to the next topic. Ragweed, always a problem. I'm sure you guys got lots of this. Is that a problem on your farm, Harold?
If you don't get harvested in time.
Yeah. So, you know, ragweed, I would say, is one of the major weeds that we have to deal with. It's not a problem to get it cleaned out of the grain. It's not like the other weeds I've talked about. But, you know, this is a field of oats. When it gets in there, it makes it really difficult to harvest. And you can get a lot of field losses because that green material going through your combine, all the grain gets stuck to that. It can get onto your chaffer and carry grain out the back. It gets into the grain and makes the grain smell funny and makes it difficult to... I've been in a truckload of oats that had a lot of ragweed seed in it and had the box all the way up, and I was up there like some wacko coal miner with a pick knocking this stuff to try to get it to come out of the truck. I mean, it can get pretty nasty, and it's mostly a problem on your spring grains, and heating is a big problem with it. So, you know, again, I'm extolling the virtues of owning a swather. This is the silver bullet when you have a weed problem in your spring grain, where we've got this horrible ragweed problem like this field of oats. You can go in there and just knock that stuff into windrows, and if you let that sit, even if you let it sit one day, it'll make a huge improvement on combining. But we try to wait for a couple of hot days. And if you can leave that down on the ground and let that ragweed dry out in the windrow with the grain, it'll go right through the combine and right out the back of the combine, and you'll have no issues whatsoever. And actually, the combining goes a lot faster when it's swathed. So, you know, this will get you out of some real messes if you get into a, you know, problem with ragweed or even with foxtail and things like that, green, grassy grains that come in and are still green with green seeds in them at the time of harvest. Swathing is really, that machine paid for itself several times when we had different weed disasters, which, you know, we always have weed disasters. So there's pickup head that you'll need to go along with it. But as I said, the harvesting it off the ground like that is really nice, and it it just makes the whole process really painless, honestly. So we're going to take a break now, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of post-harvest handling stuff, what we do in terms of, you know, drying requirements and some simple cleaning stuff that we do, which will be, you know, you were supposed to get a talk about grain storage, but me and Harold are going to try to hit on it. We're going to talk about how to handle the grain afterwards to make sure the quality is the best. You know, I'll just say, good sampling. We sample every time a truck comes in from the field. I try to get a couple coffee cups, throw it in a 5-gallon pail and keep mixing it, because you know the sample is going to be what you send to whoever you're selling it to, and you want to get a real representative sample, not just for them, but for you, because you don't know where that grain could have come off a headland or a part of the field that the protein was low, or maybe it was in the shade a lot and had some more sprout damage or whatever it was. You want to get pieces from all over, mix it together, and then, you know, you're guaranteed to know that that's the quality of your grain. And bad sampling is one thing that the guys I work with always screw this up, and it's super simple, but you just gotta, you know, you get a 5-gallon pail and just, you're sitting there unloading the truck, just grab a couple samples and put them in. So,
all right.
Pretty basic.
Thank you, Thor. Let's give him a round of applause.